Hello everyone, welcome to Series 3 of the GBA Lightbulb Sessions. The Great British Entrepreneur Awards, in association with BT Skills for Tomorrow, have designed a free live stream series of Lightbulb Sessions to support small businesses and entrepreneurs with insightful and advice-driven sessions, featuring some of the UK's brilliant entrepreneurial minds to illuminate your path to entrepreneurial success. You can find out more about BT Skills for Tomorrow by heading to their website at www.bt.com/skills for tomorrow or by clicking on the link in the comment section. In today's session, Great British Entrepreneur Awards Head of Content Jonathan Davis will be speaking with founder of BoroughBox, Andy Lawson. Andy will discuss the importance of understanding a D2C, direct-to-consumer, strategy and how this can impact your business. He will explore how the pandemic has accelerated the growth in brands built in the D2C model and what challenges a D2C brand could face. There is an opportunity to ask questions during this session. If you have a question you'd like to ask, you can pop this in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer these later on in the session. And with that, I'll pass over to our host today, Jonathan Davis.
Thank you very much, Chloe. And Andy, thank you for joining us and taking the time today.
No problems.
It's great to have you here. And I guess it's always a great place to start by learning a little bit more about yourself, your journey, and BoroughBox.
Yeah, so I am getting rapidly becoming an old man. So I can say the last 20 years have been a combination of e-commerce for a long time and the sort of birth of digital from the early noughties, and then around 2010, 2011, I started working in the independent food and drink sector, and then in 2014, I really decided to bring the two back together to help the independent food and drink brands sort of grow and scale within a tricky supply chain whilst leveraging my previous e-commerce background.
Excellent. And so tell us a bit about what BoroughBox is, exactly what it does, and kind of where the inspiration came from, where the light bulb moment, so to speak, came from.
Yeah, so we're a bit of a multifaceted business, and we cover both. We do D2C and B2B in terms of the areas we operate in. I think my light bulb moment was when I took my sabbatical out of e-commerce and wanted to come from behind a computer and go and work at the coalface at something which I did in independent food and drink. I saw the challenges that I thought some really fantastic producers and brands worked very hard on product, and they'd very often given up a completely different career, quite successful careers, to focus on producing one item or dedicating their life to cracking a new category. But the supply chain really isn't designed with small independent brands in mind. It's sort of built in and around the bigger brands. So decided literally that we were going to do everything we could as a business to help champion the independent food and drink scene and help brands scale and become the more mainstream brands of tomorrow. So to do that, we had to meticulously build different business units to support that. But we've got, BoroughBox.com is an online marketplace, but we also retail directly through BoroughBox ourselves, and have always bought from producers, and we've got some great sort of fantastic signature gifts that we've always done that really helped open doors and get brands out there. We have 3PL sort of logistics fulfillment services. So we've got a couple of warehouses, one in London, one in Welwyn Garden City, where I am now, where we store, pick, pack and dispatch on behalf of brands. So that will be their own direct consumer orders, their own retailer orders, other marketplaces, etc. And then we also sort of distribute and wholesale out their products to other brands, to other businesses. So we are a distributor to brand businesses like Planet Organic and various coffee shops, delis, etc. And our goal really is to be this one-stop shop for independent food and drink brands, where really we've kind of harmonized and consolidated digital and physical services under a physical and a digital roof.
Yeah, fantastic. And you mentioned that you create your own product as well. How do you balance that with the independent retailers? Because is there some element of competition across different products?
In terms of what? Sorry, when you say we create our own.
You know, you've got your own BoroughBox items and products for sale. How do you balance that with wanting to support the independent retailers that might produce similar items and similar products?
Well, we buy from the producers, so they are the producer. You know, it's the producer's products. What we've done is create a kind of brand and veneer that showcases those brands. So as a retailer, we're like anything, we're buying and reselling product from producers and acting, you know, as a retailer. When it comes to our kind of gift collection and our signature side, how I very first started the business, in fact, the idea was that rather than, if you look at something like, I guess a good example might be a Fortnum & Mason hamper, as the gift I looked at in the very beginning, which was all private label product on behalf of Fortnum & Mason. We said, actually, our box, our gift box will actually resonate all of those independent brands. It will showcase their own stories. It will be about the brands inside the box. So we weren't trying to relabel products under our own name. And by creating that awareness of those brands, and then making those brands, you know, giving them a platform to be able to sell back through the marketplace or through us, it meant that hopefully we were helping provide a platform to sell on, but also going and finding new customers that wouldn't have discovered those brands by us curating these kind of signature boxes. So that's the principle of how we started, and that's sort of goes on today throughout the business.
Yeah, great. And you know, we obviously know that the kind of broader topic of this discussion is around D2C, direct to consumer. I'm sure the majority of people attending today already know what it is, but just for the avoidance of doubt, for anyone who doesn't know what it is, could you just briefly kind of explain direct to consumer for us?
Yeah, it is exactly what it says on the tin. You know, a brand or a producer selling directly to a customer, shipping directly to a customer, transacting and having that very direct relationship. It's something that has been around, you know, since the day that somebody went and created a jam at home, popped up at a farmer's market, and, you know, sold directly to some customers physically. It's just, you know, expanded into and including, you know, very prevalent now, obviously a kind of digital space as well. And, you know, a brand, you know, it's a really worthwhile thing for a brand for a number of reasons, which I'm sure we'll go through. But, you know, you can shop from most producers' own websites these days. There's very few that are just directing you to a supermarket.
Yeah, and you mentioned there that, you know, it kind of harks back to a long time ago. The direct to consumer is probably the most traditional model of retail, and obviously we know that supermarkets came along, and then online platforms like Amazon came and dominated the whole market, and kind of grabbed everyone's attention. How has that shifted back towards D2C since the start of the pandemic?
Well, the pandemic definitely offered an opportunity for if 10-20% of people were comfortable shopping online, all of a sudden, if everybody had to clamber online, then by its very nature, even the largest of retailers weren't necessarily geared up to deal with that kind of surge. So people were put into a forced situation where they would then go and explore online a lot more, and discover new brands, shop from, and those brands that maybe aren't listed in the supermarket started to get a bit more of a viewing. And it meant that, you know, they control their own stock. They've got new customers discovering them online, and all of a sudden they've got a whole new outlet for their product that is literally direct to consumer, rather than spending their days, you know, knocking on the retailer's door. That's not to say that it's not worth having a good spread of how you sort of build your brand, but it's been, you know, particularly effective, and for customers, I think that's been enjoyable, because when a brand, you know, operates in direct to consumer way, of course, it's so much easier to maintain your brand integrity, your quality, your pricing. It's all about, you know, your experience. You're in full control of how the customer experiences your brand, and it can be more of an experience than a product purchase. And that has, you know, been incredibly popular even pre-pandemic through very sort of worthwhile propositions or simple things. You've seen pet food, you've seen things like vitamins, you've seen things like ready meals where there's a reason to put something on subscription. You know, that had been building up for a few years. There's been lots of very popular subscriptions that have come about, because if you've got a need for something and the trade-off is that the shipping cost doesn't outweigh the sort of value proposition, and you know you're going to need it regularly, then the experience can be you know, really enjoyable. It becomes more difficult if you have a sort of smaller product where potentially the shipping and fulfillment costs start to negate any of the benefits of for the customer ordering it on a direct consumer basis.
Yeah, and something that you put in the kind of blurb for the discussion was how the pandemic has accelerated the shift. Where do you think we would have been, or how far away do you think we would have been from this point if we didn't have the pandemic? You know, would we have been a year behind, 2 years behind?
No, I think there's a good few years of accelerated sort of habitual changes by consumers, just because, you know, when you're literally forced to do something, then you have to do it, and no matter what age group or demographic you're in, you sort of had to find your way digitally and get comfortable around ordering online. And I think that's probably going to stay to some great effect, because people realize how convenient it can be to just shop online. And you know, I think we're probably going to see now over the next couple of months, as the pandemic defrosts, everybody, rightly so, just wants to go out, breathe some fresh air, do something normal, and I imagine you'll see, you know, a bit of a dip off. But then as things tend to sort of recalibrate a little bit, I think we're definitely going to see that we are a few years ahead now on, you know, the number of people that consistently shop online each day, week and month.
Yeah, and my next question was going to be about the kind of post-pandemic. Obviously, there's been so much talk about whether or not various trends are going to continue when normal life returns. Not necessarily in this space, you know, whether it's office space, whether it's what we do in our spare time, but at the same time that we've seen this re-emergence of direct-to-consumer, you know, we've seen the likes of Amazon have absolutely monumental growth over the past year. Do you see that this shift towards D2C really continuing beyond the pandemic? And I know you mentioned the kind of recalibration, but if we're looking a little bit more long term than immediately after the pandemic.
I do, yeah. I certainly see it. Certainly on some of the categories that I mentioned. I think there's an absolutely solid proposition for, you know, repeatedly engaging with a number of brands in a number of categories that you consume or otherwise within a month. It's interesting. Obviously, look at Amazon, and then we have a marketplace. They are the kind of in between, right? They are not the retailer, but they are an extension of direct to consumer. In terms of, yes, you are in among other product and other producers, but you maintain control of your pricing, potentially your shop within the shop, which isn't like a more traditional retailer or a supermarket where you know, I mean, obviously the margin squeeze is very different, but also you don't maintain that proposition in the supermarket yourself. It's up to them how they price you and present you, and you sort of lose anything. Whereas the kind of Amazon and the marketplaces like ourselves, you do maintain certain elements of control. You are directly shipping to a consumer, although again, a bit like us and Amazon, you offer to fulfill, but you are fulfilling direct for small fragmented consumer orders. And you know, you don't have the kind of customer acquisition costs, which is the trade-off of why you start working with a marketplace. Because if you look at if you're just wholly in the D2C camp and it's your own website and everything, then it's down to you entirely to cover every kind of customer acquisition costs, every element of the shipping and the fulfillment and the processing. And again, that's where the kind of value proposition needs to be really correct for it to work as a pure D2C play, because these other costs are picked up by you know, by marketplaces and, you know, retailers at the other end.
Yeah, and so you mentioned something there about purely D2C, or, you know, through marketplaces, supermarkets, things like that. How does D2C differ logistically to other models, and kind of what benefits does it have in that respect?
Well, the benefits are definitely the control of the experience and control of the products and the way you are able to respond. You also can commercially benefit, I suppose, from being in control of a direct, you know, a D2C proposition. You can obviously do things like insert swaps. You can work with other potentially non-competitive brands, and you just have an element of full control, which, you know, I mean, I try and I mean, obviously I haven't got some sort of never-ending budget, but I always try to spend my money across a variety of channels just so I can see what's happening. And, you know, a good example, recently I ordered the bit of a plug for Nourished, the 3D printed vitamins over, you know, I could go to Holland and Barrett or something like that and buy, you know, the capsule vitamins, or this pure D2C experience, which is personalized vitamins, you know, in 3D printed gel format. And when that arrives, that's arriving in its own, you know, its own nice branded box. It's individually wrapped, you know, 30 vitamin pastels. The materials within the box are all personalized to me. So that is fundamentally, what am I buying now? I mean, vitamins are vitamins, you know, hopefully I'm still getting the same benefits from either one, but the experience, of course, is you know, poles apart. So I've now got a bond and an affiliation and some sort of, you know, romanticized kind of you know, relationship almost with the way these personalized vitamins, or it's just a plastic tub of not really bothered about the brand, don't know who that is. So that's a kind of real, you know, the stark difference between a good D2C experience and just picking something up from the shelf. The benefits that come from having a really strong D2C proposition, and whether that is directly through you or you are leveraging a marketplace, you are still shipping directly, you're still in, you've got, you know, the tribe and the loyalty effect of the customers. It's much easier to get feedback from the customer directly, because the chances are, if I didn't like the vitamins on the shelf in Holland and Barrett, I might feed it back to Holland and Barrett. Chances of me going back to the brand, whereas the brand is encouraging me to feedback, so I feel even more engaged. That obviously lends itself for the brand to be able to iterate product, learn quickly what works, what doesn't, whether pricing works, and of course, if they are looking to launch new products and evolve that product range, they already have an active audience to work with, and if they're, you know, trying to use that data correctly, they know, you know, what they're going to like, what they're not going to like, and where their new product development should focus. So there's a huge world of benefits if the proposition and the product is right.
Yeah, absolutely, and I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but I'm very impressed that the plug was of a previous finalist of the British Entrepreneur Awards, Nourished.
Oh right, well yeah, I was watching something with them actually a few weeks ago. It's a really interesting kind of concept. I mean, people are looking at every element of your life, and I know they talk about, you know, subscription, lots of subscription bandied around. You know, that's been the kind of buzzword for a few years, but it's particularly handy. You know, I've got 2 dogs and a cat, and, you know, if you subscribe to you know, pet food products, for example, you know, they're big, heavy, cumbersome things. You don't run out. You know, you don't have to think about it. And from a producer point of view, you know, outside, if we forget about the fulfillment and shipping, and as I say, that has to be correct. Of course, you're not losing as much margin in the product. You're holding on to it. You're not splitting it out between kind of distributors and retailers. So you've got more margin in there to start with, which hopefully means you can translate into covering some of those shipping costs, logistics costs, and the value to the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that you mentioned in your previous answer about you know, brand loyalty and affiliation. Do you think that is from a consumer point of view, the kind of key reason that that D2C has been able to kind of re-emerge, because for probably about the best part of a decade, so much of consumerism has been focused on the convenience, and that has been the focus. That's the reason that Amazon Prime has exploded, because you can get a delivery sometimes the same day, let alone the next day. So do you think it is that affiliation with a brand, with the entrepreneur's story, that has kind of allowed it to flourish from a consumer point of view?
Yes, I think it all contributes, and I think possibly, probably the quality of what I can't imagine putting, being that bothered about ordering something directly from a brand that I felt was a sort of a very everyday basic kind of product with no real, because you say you want to buy into the founder. So, the origins of BoroughBox back in the day, when, I could see firsthand how much time, energy and enthusiasm and specialism and skills have gone into developing that product. Those are the products that work well, where there is a genuine kind of competitive edge, a sort of product quality, a pedigree that's there. I think that's what really makes it worthwhile for ordering something on a D2C basis.
Yeah, and we mentioned kind of the not necessarily issue, I was going to say issue, but the dilemma of whether you go purely D2C or you split across supermarkets and things like that. Looking at businesses that have always focused on third-party retail supermarkets, how difficult is it to start a D2C approach, or even indeed switch to it?
Yeah, I think that's quite an interesting one, because usually, I guess I'm going off my, my knowledge. When people if you build a brand specifically designed for supermarkets and designed for that mass production early on, a real volume gain, then you've tended to go down that route. So I would imagine then I spoke to somebody, I can't remember whether it was during the pandemic, it was the early stages. It was with a water spark. I think it was sparkling or kind of a posh water, probably far too expensive for me kind of job. But I remember they were really geared up for the mass production. Only sold in pallets, really, only dealt in lorries, that kind of mentality. But I realised when some things went wrong, they had no real buy-in from. They've got no real buy-in from a customer, and therefore, if you're just on that retailer and they decide to change and decide they want another producer or another water, all of a sudden you can lose huge chunks of volume of business in one go, and that's quite a common story for producers generally. Many food and drink businesses have been built. Maybe had success too early or got a big listing too early, then sort of re-engineered their whole business around that one contract, then had the rug pulled from under them. New buyer comes in, don't like that, want to change that, this kind of thing. So, all of a sudden it's you'll be off our shelves in 3 months' time. You're trying to backtrack and realize you've got no direct to consumer proposition. You've got no other channels. You've not developed a kind of omni-channel, omni-customer approach. I think like anything, spread betting, placing different areas, the emphasis in different areas works well. That way, if you are destabilized in one way, you're not destabilized completely. I think some brands will struggle to all of a sudden become direct consumer brands because you're sort of backtracking. Whereas I guess a good example of a brand that's done quite recently. So, Pastor Evangelists have probably been a good example of a brand that.
Another good plug for a previous.
Is it? I wish I got your briefing notes. I could have asked for money for plugs. But no, they're a really interesting case study. Obviously, you come around with a really strong direct-to-consumer proposition of a pastor subscription. Really nailed the proposition correctly and built up this D2C loyal following, and then from that successfully then evolved and iterated and launched products, which is now available, not that I shop in too many supermarkets, but I believe on, supermarket shelves, a pasta evangelist sauce. So you've got the kind of credibility of this story at the very beginning, and the passion of the founders and the product that feeds there. Now, if they'd have started off with just the sauce at the other end, the question is, how difficult would that have been to reverse engineer back into two people, sort of how you would kind of mentally envisage them, sweating over making this incredible pasta and, being covered in flour and hand making everything. It's just a very difficult thing to reverse engineer.
Yeah, so it certainly sounds as though for a new business starting off, that it's certainly a lot easier to start off D2C and expand from there, rather than aim high, aim for the supermarket straight away. And then, well,
if you get your product wrong, and I've definitely seen this, because we've like anything, we've seen casualties of war during our short seven years of existence. I've seen people produce product, then invest a lot in producing a significant quantity of that product for it not to be right, and that's completely slashed their budget, almost bankrupted them, sometimes bankrupted them. Whereas if you start with a slightly smaller ambition, you get to test your product, often in a real-time environment. You can turn up at farmers markets. That's a really good indicator of where you're going. You get to iterate everything from your products to your packaging to your pricing to everything, and you get to engage with customers and actually hear what they would be interested in having in that product, or why they would buy it, or what would make it better. And then, of course, you get to iterate it and build up. Whereas if you've done that the other way around, people do it successfully, but you've got to be really kind of clinical. You've got to get it right first time. One of the guys that works for us, I don't know if I give him a plug, whether you're also giving him a pat on the back, but Jake, who works for us, who is our operations manager, loves his beer, and we encouraged him. We wanted to support him when he wanted to launch his own business, and now he sort of does both. Majority work for us as he's building up his beer business. He is a classic example of somebody that has spent months and months tinkering in the background before he went to market with his beer. Then he has produced a couple, a pale ale to start with, and a lager. He's just about to launch an IPA. And then he's gone and stood there at the markets, and he's gone and stood, and he's talked to customers, and he's iterated that recipe. And he's always had his own website and a direct-to-consumer proposition for them to that. But that is hard to just build from scratch. So the next step was, he also now sells to us, and we list on our retail proposition on BoroughBox, and we also include his beers in some of our gifts as well. And he will gradually build up to the point where I'm sure, if he wants to go mass market, he can. But it's not for everybody, because sometimes it ruins what you are as a brand. Sometimes you want to remain independent and accessible in certain places, but not everywhere, for the very veneer of what you've created to maintain that. Yeah,
and I was about to ask, do you think that this re-emergence is changing the ambitions of startups, where it's probably fair to say that in the last probably 20, maybe even more years, that if you're starting a food business, the goal is getting onto the supermarket shelves. Do you think that this re-emergence has shifted for startups, where that's not the goal, that's not the end goal?
No, I think the goal is to sort of decide the places you want to be, and make sure you're accessible where you need to be, and understand the margins that drive that and the differences, and then look at that as a blended margin across your business. I mean, you can't ignore it's not my cup of tea, these kind of, order your groceries and have them like in 10 minutes kind of thing, because a lot of that proposition is very much around convenience and speed, but it doesn't strike me, the products that are being advertised are just widely available in any shop or any supermarket. But you can't ignore the sort of fragmented way we shop these days. Or we dip into marketplaces, we dip into a D2C, a couple, like I say, I have vitamins on subscription, I have a couple of things on subscription, or I always order from this producer. Then I use marketplaces myself, where we've got one, so that would be silly not to use it. We've got that. Even though I've got an Amazon account for more what I would call basic everyday products. Occasionally go to the supermarket, like mixing it up. Don't really have a loyalty to a supermarket, but maybe that's because of my job, that I want to see other things. But really, it's about, we tried them for 2 or 3 weeks. And it's difficult because consumers are fickle, and they are they're empowered these days with technology and offers, and lots of people that are heavily invested. The convenience players are, they're supplementing every delivery to drive a race to the bottom in some ways on that kind of speed. And it's tough. That's why, if you have a loyal following from the start and you've got that D2C, hopefully you've always got a customer base. And that customer base, if nurtured and fostered correctly, are probably going to be your best brand ambassadors and advocates of your brand, and able to tell peers. And if that's the right demographic, the chances are that they mix with the same types of demographic, in the majority, so that they can, it's a combination of both. But if you've got that tribe, that D2C, that solid base, I think it's a really good thing to build.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm kind of conscious of the time, and we've had quite a few questions come through. So I'll just ask one final one before we'll move on to the attendee questions. So we'll end from me. What is the most important element of a D2C strategy to you?
I just think it's the sort of value proposition and the brand integrity and the loyalty. Just that proposition, the bond, the connection, that really enforces that. If you've got somebody that buys from you, it gets much harder to change if you are directly. If you're directly in tune with that company, you feel bad changing, right? You walk into the supermarket, you might look at which toothpaste is just the cheapest that day. You just don't care, because as long as it's one of 3 that you like, in which case you're always bobbing around. And I wouldn't think twice about the end brand. But the bond I have with the people that I'm really connected to on a D2C basis, then you feel like you're sort of cheating on them. They've done nothing wrong. They've really looked after me, and maybe it's not perfect, but maybe I can help them into it. So I think that's probably, to me, the most important thing with D2C. And you achieve that through your own website. You achieve that anytime you're in control of fulfilling directly, including marketplaces.
Brilliant. Like I said, we've had quite a few questions through on the Q&A. So the first one is an anonymous question who asks if you have any tips on lead and sales generation.
Tips on lead and sales generation. Yeah, I should do. I suppose I've come from a background. I think it depends. It depends what category you're in, what you're trying to do. I think there are some. If you can be bothered to read all the bump that goes with being a good seller, or using social media advertising correctly, or understanding the traits of Google Shopping. It's the biggest tip for selling and lead generation is don't try and appeal to everybody. It's know your niche, even if that customer base is quite small. Don't try and stray outside of that, and make sure your connection points resonate with those customers. And that's a good starting point. When you try to cover everybody and everything, you're really selling to nobody, because it's you need that really clear understanding of your demographic and why you're talking to them.
Great. And we've got another question from Gail, who asks, specifically looking at BoroughBox, what has been the most successful way that you have reached your target market? When I started BoroughBox, I did it the hard direct to consumer way. Although in the background, we weren't a funded business in any way, shape, or form. It was just me. It was my risk, my kind of money. And while I was building the e-commerce sort of marketplace, which as an uninvested business, it's not, so it wasn't all bells and whistles. I just literally went door knocking. I had a proposition that I felt with our gifts and hampers would work very well on corporate.
I decided that corporates would be our low-hanging fruits. And the reason for that is because we had a kind of a nice looking gift box. This is our gifting side. That's the real connection we try and make early on. So I said, right, well, we'll go over into the city. They'll resonate with what we do. We've kind of got this East London versus West London trade-off. West London could be Fortnum's. The cool guys in the city can be BoroughBox. The benefits of working with a corporate or trying to find corporates, and I did shows, and I just networked around and went to various like breakfast meetings just to try and get some kind of contacts, looked at PAs, EAs, marketing people. The benefits, of course, were when we got an order, we would get an order for multiple gifts going to recipients we'd never had to get to. So it's a single customer service point for us to talk to, which is quite easy to manage as a small business. But the effect was that we would be in front of 50 people simultaneously if they ordered one of our boxes. There's 50 new customers that would have exposure to our brand and what we were doing. If I'd have had to try and target those 50 individuals as consumers to start with, that would have been really costly. So that's how I went about it. So that's probably been our successful point of, because we've been, we've not been a funded company. We've done it the old-fashioned way. We've just tried to work with the network, make sure producers know what we do as much as possible, leverage those corporates, leverage consumers. And, we've not had the money. We've not had, 10 million quid to do a big television campaign. Maybe one day.
No, it's a fantastic insight into how you started and kind of the journey that you've been on since. Another anonymous question. So they say, I'm a new startup and have been struggling through the pandemic. However, I fear my business may not be prepared for D2C. When would you recommend using a D2C strategy?
That's an interesting one, because I don't know what the product is. Most people would be sort of starting with that D2C proposition, usually because you can maintain another job, right? So you go and create a product, and it's sort of, I can set up a bit of a website, and I can start on this journey on a kind of risk-free basis. Hopefully, haven't over-invested capital in producing too much product on sort of fantastical kind of run rates that you think are going to happen. That's another problem we're trying to solve at BoroughBox as we offer fulfillment services in 3PL. It's hopefully we'll be able to feed back some of the insights to other producers so they understand run rates. If you're struggling to get a direct consumer proposition during the pandemic, when everybody is looking to go online, and I'm making an assumption that you've got the website, I don't know the answer, because a lot of people have picked up. The vast majority of people we've spoken to have seen a bit of an increase in orders. So I guess that's hopefully whoever the person is, obviously you can reach out to me, hasn't been kind of oversold some expensive package of web design and services, and all the budget has gone on that, because really to get up and running, you need, a bit of product, a website that transacts with the D2C, and to start going and finding a few customers. And that usually starts with feedback from friends and family. Markets, etc., are still going. They're always a good point to get very, very real-time feedback on your product in the early stages, because you can literally have 10-15-minute conversations with people. So yeah, that would be, it should be working. If it's not, unless the product, if you have to just hold your hands up and say it's not the right product, it's not the right price, I don't know. It could be a number of things. I can't tell without more insight.
And I'm not sure if Chloe mentioned it in her intro, but just to reiterate, both myself and Andy's LinkedIn are going to be put into the comment section. So if you do want to follow up with Andy on anything, then that's there for you. We've got another question. I'm guessing that this actually came in before, because we did discuss it, the benefits of a small business having a D2C strategy. So because you did discuss it, I'll flip it and say, what are the drawbacks
of having a D2C proposition?
Model, yeah.
Yeah, definitely eating into your time. and your time is valuable. And if you that's usually when it's usually when a brand comes to us. I mean, we've obviously got a marketplace, which is and others have, which is a great opportunity to list your products, not have to worry about generating the sale, and you'll sort of get to ship things out and maintain that control plus your own website. There comes a point, of course, when you are spending your day just picking and packing and going to the post office or whatever that may be, that you've kind of hit your critical mass, that is the finite amount of time that I can do in any one day to deal, the critical mass of any number of orders. If I now take on more orders, I either need to take on somebody else, or I go and start using a fulfillment center or someone that's going to help. So definitely the drawbacks are, of course, a bit like that market conversation I mentioned. It can take 15 minutes talking to a customer, and of course, have 100 customers and you're all really engaged with them and you're trying to do it on your own. Then you're just spending all your time communicating with customers, and all of a sudden you're not progressing your business. So it's a really hard thing to balance out. But you can start to plan out and understand at which juncture in your business or at which milestone you maybe want to change something within it, from a service or a new member of staff, or go on to the next rung of, now we'll sell on marketplaces, now we'll try and get listed wholesalers, now we'll try and export, whatever that may be.
Yeah, brilliant. And so I think we've probably got time for one final one, and this one comes from Harry, who, judging by the question, I guess, is a little bit further along in the business growth. What's the most cost-effective way to scale your D2C globally?
Whew, that's a good question. Globally is a tricky answer at the moment, because, of course, I've been privy to various conversations over the last couple of weeks, and of course we do fulfillment. The Brexit mess of European deliveries. People are struggling to get product in the country. Couriers have stopped shipping, full stop, saying until this mess is sorted out, we can't get things out of the country. So that's kind of just created a big red flag generally on some certain area of the world. I think there is direct to consumer being sent literally with all of those bells and whistles I mentioned. There are marketplaces that you can sell on globally pretty much from the start. They will do the fulfillment for you. You still have customers that are getting, but you do lose the experience that they get. You can't then do all of the personalization and all of some of those bells and whistles, but you still do get to sell your stock. Losing less on a commission to a marketplace isn't going to be as much as a margin by the time you've gone through the more traditional routes and you're squeezed right down. So for the sake of anywhere from we will range from sort of 15 to 30% kind of ex VAT commission. A lot of the work is being done for you on that customer acquisition cost on those marketplaces. They can often fulfill for you. They're encouraging people to put your product on subscription as well. As a marketplace, usually they're incentivizing people. So there's a big, and of course you've got privy to the customer. You still get the customer information. That's something we haven't mentioned. When it's a retail, of course, on a retail shelf, you don't know from Adam who bought it. Whereas whether it's through a marketplace or whether it's just purely you, of course, you've got customer information, so you can start to learn from that, learn where geographically, demographically, anything is working.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that rounds us off really nicely. Andy, thank you so much for the past 45 minutes. We've had some through. Thanking you as well for your insight. It's been really fantastic. I feel like I want to go away and start a food business now.
Oh well, no, you can LinkedIn me about that one. Well, I think it's tough. Food and drink is hard work. It's at times it's very unglamorous. It can be very antisocial. I've worked in food and drink at all kinds of hours that are antisocial. Usually, just when everybody else is off at the weekend, you're setting up that kind of mentality. It's competitive, but at least the one saving grace is that everybody eats and drinks. So unless that suddenly stops, you've always got some kind of starting point of an audience. It's a trend that's not going to die, eating and drinking.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, like I said, Andy, thank you so much. It's been brilliant talking to you for the past 45 minutes, and yeah, it's been really insightful. And with that, I will pass back over to Chloe.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Andy, for joining us and sharing your knowledge with us today. Do you have any final words before we sign off?
Let me take myself back off mute. No, just you know, good luck, work hard, try and understand the unit economics, try and understand the value proposition, and try and, you know, make sure that you have elements of everything planned out, even if you're not doing them, try and do them in the right order. But understand a good spread gives you that bit of protection, rather than just relying on one channel or one thing. That would be my advice.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. If there is anything you'd like to catch up on from today's session, we'll be sending out a replay of the recording coming later on today. You can find the replay and future sessions at www.lightbulb-sessions.haysummit.com. Our next session will be at the same time next week with Donna O'Toole as she shares advice on 6 steps to award success. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you again, Andy and John.